The wind howled as the small funeral procession gathered at the cemetery, the soft rustling of leaves the only sound in the otherwise silent field. Sergeant Michael Thompson stood beside his wife's grave, the weight of her absence pressing heavily on his chest. His hands trembled as he clutched the American flag draped across her casket. She had been his rock, his partner, and the love of his life. Now all that remained was this quiet, somber moment, the final farewell. But as he stood there, his thoughts distant, the sound of boots on gravel caught his attention. He turned, startled, to see a police officer walking towards him, his face stern, his uniform crisply pressed. "Sergeant Thompson," the officer said, his voice clipped. "You're going to need to move along. This is a restricted area." Michael's eyes narrowed. He'd been in enough combat zones to recognize authority when it was misplaced, but this was different. His wife had just been laid to rest, and this officer had the audacity to tell him he couldn't stand beside her grave. His heart pounded in his chest, his emotions raw from the loss. "I'm not going anywhere," Michael replied, his voice barely a whisper but strong enough to convey the intensity of his defiance. The officer's expression didn't soften. Instead, he reached for his taser, his hand moving with practiced precision. Michael, stunned, took a step back. "This is your last warning, Sergeant. Move." But Michael wasn't about to back down. Not today. Not after everything he had sacrificed. His fists clenched at his sides, his breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. "You don't know who I am," he said, his voice breaking, the weight of his words heavy with years of service, of pain, of war. "I've bled for this country. I've lost everything. And now you want to take even this from me?" The officer's hand hovered over the taser. "I don't want any trouble, Sergeant, but I'll do what's necessary." The crowd gathered at the cemetery watched in uneasy silence as the tension escalated. Michael stood his ground, his face a mask of pain and determination. The officer didn't understand. He had no idea what it was like to fight for your life on a battlefield, to lose everything and still keep going. He didn't know what it was like to be a soldier. And yet, with one swift movement, the officer drew his taser and fired. The electric current hit Michael's chest, sending him collapsing to the ground. The world spun around him as he struggled to breathe, his body racked with pain, his mind still struggling to comprehend the absurdity of what had just happened. He lay there, unable to move, feeling every ounce of dignity slip away as the officer stood over him. The officer didn't offer an apology. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Michael on the ground, writhing in agony as the crowd murmured in disbelief. But this wasn't the end of the story. Far from it. As Michael lay there, struggling to regain his breath, the unmistakable sound of heavy boots echoed in the distance. He turned his head, barely able to focus. His eyes widened as he saw a group of men approaching, their faces stern and determined. They wore no uniforms, but their presence was unmistakable. Marines. And they were coming for the officer. The Marines had been watching from a distance. They had seen the injustice, the humiliation. They knew Michael's story. They knew what he had done for his country, for them. They knew that a man like him deserved respect, not violence. As they marched forward, they surrounded the block, their movements deliberate, coordinated. Their silent solidarity sent a message that could not be ignored. The officer, now aware of the situation, froze. He turned to face the Marines, his taser still drawn, but his confidence wavered. "What is this?" he demanded. "I'm just doing my job." The lead Marine, his face scarred from battles fought in far-off lands, stepped forward. "You don't know what it means to serve," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You don't know what it means to sacrifice everything." But he does. He nodded toward Michael, still lying on the ground, struggling to sit up. "And today you'll learn what it means to face the consequences." The officer's hand trembled as he lowered his taser, realizing that the tide had turned. His actions had triggered something far greater than he had anticipated. The Marines were here, and they were not going to let him walk away from this. The scene was one of strange contrast. The funeral, once a quiet moment of mourning, had become a tense standoff between those who served their country in different ways. Michael, his chest still aching from the shock of the taser, slowly pushed himself up, his military training kicking in despite the pain. He wiped the dirt from his face, his body screaming for rest, but his mind was sharp. The Marines stood around him, their posture strong and unwavering. The officer, now fully aware of the gravity of his mistake, looked around nervously. His hand twitched at his side, and he took a step back. I didn't mean for this to happen, he stammered, his voice faltering. I was just following orders. Michael, still weak but filled with a sense of purpose, locked eyes with the officer. He could feel the weight of his years of service pressing down on him. Following orders? He repeated. Is that what you tell yourself when you harm a man who's already given everything, who lost his wife, who gave his body and soul to protect this country? You think following orders justifies this? The officer opened his mouth to respond, but the lead Marine stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. It's not about orders, he said, his voice filled with quiet authority. It's about doing what's right. You made a mistake, and you need to own it. The officer stood silent for a moment, the realization sinking in. He had crossed a line, one he couldn't uncross. The Marines who had fought and bled together weren't just going to let this go. They weren't just soldiers. They were brothers in arms, and they protected their own. Michael, despite the pain, felt a strange sense of pride. His fellow Marines hadn't just come for him. They had come for what was right. Finally, the officer lowered his gaze, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he whispered. The lead Marine's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. It's too late for apologies. But it's not too late for you to learn. What you did was wrong. And now you'll learn the consequences. With that, the officer turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, his pride shattered. The Marines stood there, watching him leave, their presence a silent statement of justice served. As Michael watched the officer retreat, he felt a mix of emotions. Anger still simmered in his chest. But there was a sense of closure, too. His wife's funeral had been marred by violence. But in this moment, he realized that sometimes standing up for what's right meant confronting those who tried to take it from you. It wasn't just about fighting on the battlefield. It was about standing tall in the face of injustice, no matter where you were. The Marines slowly began to disperse, but not before one of them, the lead Marine, walked over to Michael and offered him a hand. You served this country. You deserve better than that, he said quietly. Michael took the hand, pulling himself up to his feet. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for standing with me. The Marine nodded, his expression a mix of respect and understanding. We don't leave our brothers behind. As Michael looked around, he realized that no matter how many battles he had fought, this moment was one of the most defining of his life. It wasn't about the uniform or the rank. It was about honor, respect, and the unspoken bond that united those who truly served. And in that moment, he knew that the true measure of a man wasn't a T in the battles he fought or the wars he won. It was in his ability to stand up for what was right no matter the cost.